Hey, 7th graders. This is Mr. Brown coming to you from my attic where I can get some peace and quiet. Hope you guys are doing well. Uh, this video is just going to be a layout of some of the things we studied before break. Do you remember the times way before all of this madness? A long time ago, we were studying the Civil War. And so we want to go over some of those things that we'd said. You can have your book out if you want. That would be good. Your notes that we took along the way, your unit organizer, those things would be helpful. And I'll try to talk you through some of that stuff and also lead you into some of the next new material that we'll be getting to in the next few days. So here's a review. Civil War is what we were talking about, war between the North and the South. But that's not really true, right? Remember, there's 4 states that were border states. They were slave states, but they joined with the Union. They stayed in the Union. And so it wasn't just a battle between the North and the South. It was a battle between the Confederate states, the ones that broke away, and the states that stayed in the Union. Some were slave states, and some of them were free states. And we already talked about in the chapter before all of the run up to the Civil War, some of the things that provoked it, the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court said, listen, slavery is legal everywhere, really. Slavery doesn't know boundaries, and in the North, South, and so this was a step too far from the North, and the North had an election to elect the next president, and they elected someone that was probably not going to be very sympathetic towards the South in Abraham Lincoln. And several states decided to secede, to leave the country, right? Secession means to leave. And so they decided to leave the country and started their own country, the Confederate States of America, CSA. So it was the CSA versus the USA. And we talked about some of the advantages that each side had. In the North, the advantages were people. We had about 22 million people, and the South only had about 9 million people, right? So as far as numbers, it just seemed like it was clearly the North had the majority of people. Resources, the North had more stuff, more factories, more things, more money, more banks, more railroads, and so there was a lot of material advantages on the northern side. But wars aren't fought just by adding up the amount of people and the amount of stuff. It's fought on the ground, and the ground was controlled by the South. The war was going to be in the South. It was going to be in those southern states. So they had the home turf advantage, right? They knew the lay of the land. They also had very experienced war generals that were leading it, and they were probably more warlike people that were used to hunting, shooting, right? They probably had more experienced fighters in the South. Both sides were very optimistic. They're like, yeah, we're going to win. This is going to be easy, no problem. The strategies, the two sides we talked about. Remember, the North strategy was the Anaconda plan, to squeeze them and to extinguish them slowly but surely, right? They did this a few different ways. They put a barrier around the southern ports, right? All their ships were out there on the south, out in the water in the Atlantic Ocean, and they were just going to keep them from getting new supplies and control it that way. They were also going to squeeze down the Mississippi River and constrict them from the Mississippi on over to the East Coast. The Southern strategy was just to play it defensive, right? Just kind of wait and see and let them the North take the battle to them, and use their advantages of the sort of home turf advantages to their advantage. We talked about some of those early battles, right? The early fights, skirmishes, which mostly were won by the Confederate States of America. They got the early jump on the North and the Union. And that's not completely true. You know, there was some wins in the North, but they were mostly like half wins. They didn't, there was a lot of death that was taking place in some of these early battles. And so on our books, I don't know what page it was. I think section 2, we talked about how many just casualties there were. So many people dying, and the one thing that the North had was a lot more people, so they could afford to lose more people, and they were losing about 2-1 though on most of the battles. The North was getting most of the casualties, but they had more people, so they could sort of survive that. The North was also winning some of those key Western battles. Remember, Ulysses S. Grant was winning along the Mississippi River, and so if we had any advantages that were happening out west. In the North, General Lee was winning, it seemed like, every time he fought. We said that there were 2 exceptions, and they were in the North, the Gettysburg exception and then the Antietam battles were both probably, we'd say, Union victories. And we'll come to Gettysburg in the next couple of days, actually. And then we talked about life during the war. Remember how awful it was for everyone. Battles were not pleasant. People were dying in really gruesome ways, and a lot of casualties, more than what anyone expected. And people were getting fatigued of war. They were tired out from fighting. Not only the people fighting in it, but the people at home. It was a battle that had took a big toll on both sides. And that made me think about the coronavirus, what we're going through right now. In some ways, it's probably very similar because it's what everyone would have talked about from those years of 1861 to 1865. It was what everyone was discussing. If you were in the North and the South, everybody was, what's going to happen next? What's happening? What's going to go on? And everyone, it was a whole effort from everyone. There were no people who could just be like, I don't even care what's going on. It was the news. It was all the news. That was only Civil War all the time. So in some ways, maybe we could kind of relate. We had talked about the Emancipation Proclamation right before we left for break. We said that it was this ruling that Abraham Lincoln made that freed slaves in the CSA, right? So what did it do? It freed the slaves in the Confederate States and said, listen, that property that you think it's property, we think it's people. You're going to say it's property? Well, if it's property, then during wartime, as a president, Abraham Lincoln said, I'm allowed to confiscate property, and I'm going to free all of those slaves. What it didn't do was end slavery. Sometimes we think, the Emancipation Proclamation means that all the slaves are free, but that's not true. Remember, those 4 border states, slavery still was legal in it, and it didn't end slavery that day. It was a step in that direction, right? So that's one of the good things we could say. It was a step in that direction, but it made the war about slavery from that point on. Before, it had been, maybe you could say, it's about the Union versus the Confederate States of America. Slavery is part of that issue. Here it brings it to the forefront. It says the Emancipation Proclamation says slavery is what it's going to be about. And Lincoln goes all in on the slavery issue and making the war about that. And it encouraged more ex-slaves to join the Union side and to start fighting for the USA. What's next? What are we going to do? Well, I still want us to memorize, "Oh Captain, My Captain." I know that we started it and we were doing really well. We had gotten the first stanza down. We had 2 more stanzas to go. We're probably not going to hit that deadline, but we can try it still. And I don't know exactly how you'll say it to me. Maybe we'll say it over Zoom, video. Maybe you'll have to say it to your parents and they can just vouch that you did it and did a good job. I don't know, but it's a poem that I think is really great. It captures that time period of the Civil War and how important Lincoln was, and I think it's just really beautiful. So I've got it memorized. Luke Douglas has it memorized. Most of you have a good start on it, so we're going to keep on doing that. We're going to be reading about Gettysburg in the next section. An important battle, lots of good stuff on it. So one of the things I'm going to point you to are some of the great videos that you can watch on the Gettysburg, books that you can read about Gettysburg. There's lots of great stuff, and it happened close by. So someday you can go visit Gettysburg if you haven't already, and remember the sacrifice that was given at Gettysburg. And that leads us to the Gettysburg Address, another amazing Lincoln moment. He gives this really short 3-minute speech commemorating the Battle of Gettysburg while the Civil War is going on, and it's a classic. It's one of those speeches that is so short but so powerful, and we'll talk about that this week. So for Thursday, what I'd like for us to do is read section 4. Go to Google, make a Google Doc, and if you could, after reading section 4, for your homework, write a short narration. It could be 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. What was this section about? Maybe highlight some of the notes that you thought were important along the way, and then just date it, right? So section 4, Thursday, March, whatever, it'll be 27th or something like that, and reading 4, right? And then you can write a couple paragraphs telling us what were some of the highlights. I'll have a video that goes over some of that material coming up next. All right. How'd I do? First video, we'll see. Hopefully all this works out well. Thanks for watching, guys.